Hello and welcome to another segment of Interviews That Matter. I'm your host Raj Mehta. Friends, in this segment we bring those guests who influence our lives. This includes elected officials, policymakers, heads of major organizations and other dignitaries. It is my sincere hope that the knowledge brought in by these guests will help our community. Today we have such guest Larry Levy. Larry Levy has been a journalist. He has been also a news political commentator, and currently he is the director for Suburban Diversity at the Hofstra University. Mr. Levy, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor to have you here. I've been trying to get you for a long time, and finally it's here.
It's my honor to be here, and I'm sorry I've been so hard to get.
Listen, that's even better, right?
Right.
So it's so hard to get, but then we got you at least. Yeah. So, normally we go for our guest, the background, that where did you started and where you are now from started to here now. So let's start with your background.
Well, I grew up on Long Island, and I lived on Long Island a long time. The only times that I did not, I lived in London for a year. I worked at a film studio, and I freelanced around Europe writing magazine articles. Not long after I graduated college, but I also lived in New York City for a while and in Boston for 6 years. But I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in a community that kind of epitomized, the new American suburbs. It was filled with new construction,
Right.
new homes, new roads, even new sewers underneath the ground.
Wow.
Everything was new. And at the time, the entire community was white.
Oh yeah.
Right, and I got to see a chapter of suburbia up close and personal. And now, to flash forward for a second, in my position at Hofstra, we study the changes in the suburbs.
Right.
And my community, where I grew up, that was 100% white, probably 90% Jewish, in fact, as I'm Jewish, is now 3/4 non-white.
Wow.
But it's a community that's doing very, very well. The houses look beautiful. School still performs well. Services are still provided. But that is more the picture of where Long Island is heading demographically. We are going from being a fairly homogeneous,
Right.
homogenized community of the 40s, 50s, and 60s after World War II to an increasingly diverse ethnically and religiously and racially community that in many ways, including its challenges, resembles the cities that people fled from a couple of generations ago. So growing up in Long Island, there are some advantages to growing up in a cocoon because it's calm and you get to know people, and people did leave their doors open for many years. And
Wow.
I had my mother and father, but I also had 30 surrogate mothers and fathers. You really got to know each other. There were no carpools. You were kicked out of the house if it was a school day and you walked to school, and you were expected to get to school and not to get into too many fights on the way. And you were expected to do well in school, which I
Right.
didn't always do. And then to play in the playground and then come home and have dinner and spend the rest of the night doing your homework.
Wow.
On the weekends, you were kicked out of the house and you would go to the schoolyard, and it was like the Lord of the Flies, the law of the jungle, the survival of the fittest.
Oh, okay.
You didn't want to get picked last for a touch football or softball or basketball game, and then you had to make do. And it could be a cruel world where kids who maybe had some learning disabilities or weren't very athletics
Right.
were bullied, and of course they grew up to be the richest and most successful people in our community. But back then it was a tough life. But for most kids it was easy. You had friends, you had your wants and your needs taken care of. You just grew up really unaware of what the world could be like for a lot of other people.
Right.
Unless you went to a summer camp where it was very different, you didn't have relationships with people of different colors and different backgrounds. And I think that probably hurts some of us. I know that it took me a long time before I was really comfortable in dealing with people who are different than me. I didn't hate them. My parents didn't bring me up that way.
Right.
But I was uncomfortable. I didn't know them. I didn't know how to act around people black or Latino or even South Asian or East Asian. And it took a while. It took a while of being out in the real world and meeting and living with different kinds of people to do that. But I suspect that some of my friends never changed, never kind of left the cocoon.
Right.
And I think their lives are poorer for it. My own children grew up in a community that, while it was relatively prosperous, it also was very diverse. That was Dix Hills.
Oh,
And they
okay.
went to the Half Hollow Hills school system.
Right, right.
And my son, one of my son's elementary school was over 30% non-white. And his two best friends were named Lamar and Jamel,
Oh.
two young black children. And when he would hear his mother and I talking about racism out there and how we have to guard against it and take stands, he was kind of puzzled, like, well, what racism are you talking about? In our classes, everybody gets along.
Right,
And Lamar, when I go to his house and his yard, everybody's friendly.
Right,
And it would have been a nice world to have grown up in. They sort of don't get that, the post-civil rights generation. So I graduated Valley Stream South High School.
Right.
And all I wanted to be at the time was a sportscaster.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Wow.
I wanted to be a sportscaster. I wanted to be the next Howard Cosell for people of a certain age. I wanted to tell it like it is on television, the way Mr. Cosell did.
Right.
And I went to Boston University.
Okay.
And I went there for a couple of reasons.
Right.
One, I got a partial scholarship to play baseball. I was a little pitcher. Playing Division I baseball.
Okay.
And they had a great school of communication.
Right.
And I thought that was a good place to learn how to be a television star.
Wow.
Right? So while I was there,
Right.
it was 1960s, early 70s.
Right.
And the world I grew up in, where everybody sort of thought the same way and agreed on most of the same things, I was in Boston during one of the most tumultuous periods in U.S. history. And there were riots in the streets over the war in Vietnam, over race, and other issues. And I was torn because, first of all, I was brought up to believe that country right or wrong, so if we're in Vietnam, then we belong in Vietnam.
Right.
Poverty, isn't that something the government deals with? It's not something that I have any responsibility for. And I was receiving a scholarship to play baseball, and that was a very conservative world, and I didn't want to jeopardize it. But I still had a conscience.
Right.
And I found the perfect way to have my cake and eat it too, as we say. I became a student journalist.
Oh, okay.
And this way I could cover the demonstrations.
Right, right,
I could be there.
Right.
But I was there for a semi-professional, for the school paper, semi-professional purpose. I didn't march with the signs.
Right.
I wrote about the marchers with the sign. So again, I had my cake and eat it too.
Right.
When the police started swinging the billy clubs, I had my press badge on, and generally speaking, I didn't get hit.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, but it all kidding aside, I found that journalism offered an opportunity to experience so much of life as a surrogate for the, in college it was thousands of readers.
Right.
When I eventually went to Newsday, it was almost 1 million readers. To be the eyes and ears of the readers, to absorb experience and to translate it and deliver it to other people. And I found it very appealing. And you may wonder, well, okay, why didn't I just go into sports writing?
Right.
I loved sports, and I still love sports. And I wanted to be a sports writer or a sportscaster, but there was so much going on in the world. I just felt maybe I ought to, pay attention to the bigger issues and keep sports as something, for my spare time, and also to pay the bills of college by playing baseball. And that's what I did. I remember I had arranged for what I thought was a sports writing internship at a paper in central Massachusetts. This was before the Kent State riots and when I first started doing news reporting. And when I showed up, the managing editor said, okay, we're going to pair you up with Dick Kindleberger, and you'll just follow him for the first few weeks.
Right.
And I said, well, he writes about City Hall and politics. He says, yes, is there anything wrong with that? I thought this was a sports internship. And he said, we don't have sports internships. Welcome to the real world. And so it was part of my life experience. Start of a life experience in journalism that I still, even though I'm at Hofstra, I still do a bit of today.
Right.
So I went to school at Boston University. I was not a good student in high school, but for some reason something clicked on, and I was a good student in college. While I was in college, I wrote freelance articles for grown-up publications. I had a part-time job with the New York Times in my senior year. And I was able to creatively name drop the Times into getting freelance assignments from other magazines. And by the time I graduated, I was already earning some money as a freelance writer.
Okay.
And I did that for almost 5 years, including a year in London, where I also worked as a screenwriter at a film studio, and decided that what I really was best at and what I really loved the most was journalism. That maybe I could have made more money doing screenwriting,
Right.
Even though I was good enough to kind of get a job. I don't think I was great at it, and I wanted to do something where I could really shine. I didn't just want to be another screenwriter in a big
Behind the scene kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I didn't mind being behind the scenes. I mean, being an editorial writer, for example, which I'll get to, you're behind the scenes, you don't get your name on anything. I didn't mind that. I really didn't. Because the people who had the power or the influence to get things done knew who you were,
Right.
even if your name wasn't on it. So that was okay. Your ego got stroked, if that's what mattered, but you also had an ability, using the clout of the paper, to sometimes push people to do the right thing or to not do the wrong thing, at least as we define the right thing.
Right.
So I was doing a lot of work for the New York Times in the 5 years after I graduated, but I never got a job on staff. And then Newsday offered me a full-time job.
Okay.
And life was starting to become more expensive. I wasn't married yet, but my parents had retired and moved, so whatever support I might have gotten from them for health insurance and if my car got dinged up, it wasn't going to come from them anymore.
Right.
And I decided, I don't think the Times is going to hire me full time, and the kind of work I wanted to do really required a major organization behind you. I remember I was down in Miami doing some freelance articles, mostly on nothing interesting or important. It was just a way to make a living. A couple of business magazines gave me assignments. My cousins, my folks were down there, so it was a chance to pay for a trip to visit them.
Right.
And I went to see All the President's Men, the book about Watergate, and Woodward and Bernstein.
Right.
And I remember watching it, and I started to cry.
Wow.
In the darkness. I said, that's what I want to be doing, not writing about a fashion boutique on South Street or a music retailer, in Fort Lauderdale. It's just not, I'm not a very religious person, but I do believe there is a God, and I like to think that maybe there's a purpose in the things that we do.
Right.
And if God had any plan for me, I hope that it was more than just turning out fluff.
Right.
So, I was in the process of thinking about what I wanted to do with my life when Newsday called.
Okay.
And they offered me a job, and not a big investigative job. I started out, in fact, covering the community I grew up in. And Valley Stream, the 5 towns, Elmont, that area.
Right.
And over the years, I eventually got to do about every job that there was at the paper. I covered local communities on Long Island. I was the county bureau chief, which is like a city hall bureau chief. You covered county government. I worked in the Albany bureau, Newsday's Albany bureau, covering state government. I worked in the Washington bureau for not a long period of time, but enough to give me some seasoning.
Right.
Then I worked on finally got to do some of the long investigations. I spent a year on one article, which is you can't do if you work on your own. You got to, you don't have a big organization behind you to sustain
Right.
you. And eventually I went to the opinion section of the paper. I was in the news section for 10 or 12 years, and then I went to the opinion section and became an editorial writer,
Oh, okay.
where you don't get your name on your articles, but
Right.
again, as I said before,
Right.
it's the opinion of the paper.
Right.
And then a couple years after that, they gave me a column. So I did the unsigned editorials, and usually once a week, I wrote a column about what I wanted to write about, with my name and my picture.
Right.
And around then, I was asked to co-host a show on PBS, on Channel 21, Channel 13, called Face Off, with Bob McMillan. Bob and I co-hosted
I know him
it.
very well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Bob McMillan's a great man.
Right.
He was very good to me. I learned a
Right.
lot from him.
Yeah.
When his co-host Pat Halpin went off
Yeah,
to another
yeah,
job,
yeah.
Bob invited me to be the co-host, and I did it for 14 years.
Oh, okay.
While I was at Newsday. It was only
Right.
once a week. It wasn't,
Right.
wasn't a full-time
Right,
job.
right.
But it was great exposure, great experience.
Yeah.
And we got to deal in every topic imaginable, not just Long Island stuff, but we would bring on Long Island experts to talk about world and national
Right,
events.
right.
And it was a great run. And it all ended when I got offered, I was made an offer that I couldn't refuse. Stuart Rabinowitz, the president of Hofstra University in
Right.
2007, heard me give a eulogy at Hofstra for a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours. And he said that the friend of ours who had passed away had said,
Right.
you should bring Larry to Hofstra. You should have lunch with him and get him to come to Hofstra.
Right.
And I said, oh, that was really nice of him. He says, well, let's talk. And Stuart had vision. Stuart has vision. He's, when he became president, he saw a university that was good, it had a degree of respect, but had so much potential that was being unrealized.
Right.
And he saw it. And it is beginning to realize that potential. It has a medical school now. It's got a full engineering school.
Right.
And he just caught the wave at just the right time. And that doesn't happen by accident. That happens from planning and, again, vision.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Stuart wanted to have a focus on the suburbs. We're located in the suburbs, and a lot of our students are going to graduate, are from the suburbs and will graduate and work in the suburbs. And he wanted to form a research institute
Right.
that
Right.
that focused on the suburbs
Right.
in terms of all the challenges, the potential and promise and problems of the suburbs. And I resisted a little bit, not because I didn't want to work for him and for Hofstra, because and this is not just fake humility,
Right.
but I didn't have a PhD, and I'd be leading PhDs. I didn't have much, if any, management experience, and I would be managing a department.
Right.
I had never raised money and had no intention of raising money, but that's what you do in academia
Right.
and in other non-for-profits. But he just made it sound like a wonderful opportunity, made me see it rather, he didn't make it sound, made me see the wonderful opportunity it was. I was also reaching a certain age and realized that this kind of opportunity would never come along again. To set up an academic research institute from start and to have a great deal of control over what it focused on
Right.
and who focused on it.
Right. Right.
So I, after 30 years, 7 months, and 14 days, I said goodbye to Newsday.
Oh.
We shook hands, me and Newsday.
Right.
No hard feelings. I still occasionally write for Newsday. I'm quoted in the paper from time to time
Right,
when
right.
they get desperate and they need to
Right.
find somebody. And I still do some television, like I do your show. I'll do other talking head shows for News 12 or for CBS or CNN and people like that. But I'm now an academic, and this is my new life.
Wow.
So in about, I don't know how long I talked for, like 3 hours, but now you have the life of Larry Levy.
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful. It's
I'm
a
sorry if
wonderful
I went
journey.
on too long.
No, it's a wonderful journey.
Yeah.
Right now you're heading National Center for Suburban Diversity, correct?
Suburban Studies.
Suburban Studies,
Right.
right? And
Yes.
also that includes diversity. Like,
Includes
you know,
yes,
diversity,
the twin,
you know,
the
like
twin
40
pillars of all our research at the
Right.
National Center for Suburban
Okay.
Studies at Hofstra
Suburban
is
Studies.
diversity and sustainability.
Okay.
And we really focus on the intersection of the two. The theme of the celebration of suburban diversity which you were one of our honorees last year, and,
Right.
and a great honoree, a great speech.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is that our social and economic survival depends on diversity. You know, how we embrace it, how we encourage it,
Right.
how we draw from the dreams and ideas and investments and of people from around the world. That we can no longer afford to be intolerant, because it not only is the wrong thing, I mean, that's an easy case to make,
Right.
but it's not only the wrong thing for our hearts and souls, or whatever word is meaningful, but it's bad for our pocketbook. That, I mean, our economic future, diversity is the key to our economic and social survival. And the good news is that more and more people, particularly in power, the decision makers, the thought leaders, the political people, the investors, seem to understand that now. And you know, our major research institutions and universities and 21st century tech companies are more and more places that are as diverse as the United Nations.
Right.
You know, executives like yourself, Indian, with an Indian background, and Charles Wang, you know, revolutionized the mainframe computing business, and he's from China, and Compare Foods, you know, a Latino, an influential Latino family, and you know, they're the folks who are going to be the, you know, the captains, and you know, you're going to be the captains of the industries of Long Island for the next generation. So, in fact, based on the research that we've done, by 2035, no later really than 2050, Long Island will have no majority race or ethnicity. It will be majority minority.
Majority
A
minority.
mixture of Black, Latino,
Asian.
South Asian, East Asian,
Right.
and it'll get there faster depending upon what's going on in the world and what's going on in this country.
Right.
A lot of it is driven by economics and politics, or geopolitics, as the phrase goes. But that's where we're headed. And the sooner we understand that its importance, the better off we're going to be. I mean, I don't think you can no longer talk in terms of tolerating different people.
Right.
That's not the right
We're
word.
beyond that.
It's embracing.
Right. Yeah.
It's embracing and trying to give a place like Long Island the reputation around the world as somewhere that you want to come. You want to bring your family, you want to bring your money, you want to bring your, again, your ideas, your inspiration, because you know, people of different backgrounds, people of different countries, you know, they're going to be not just our you know, next wave of employees, but they're going to be our employers.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not just the person who washes dishes in the back of a diner or cuts the lawn. You know, it's someone who's going to probably perform your next heart surgery.
Right.
You know, or maybe even defend you in court.
Right.
Or do your books for accounting.
Right.
This is the world we're heading to, and the sooner we become known as an oasis or a mecca, or again, pick your favorite word. The better off we're going to be. Suffolk County hired us to do a feasibility study of whether it made sense to locate a STEM arts learning center in Wyandanch as part of the whole revival. State paid for this study, gave Suffolk the money, and they hired our center.
Right.
And we wrote a report, and it involves interviewing people in the community. It involves reviewing the literature in the field, talking to people who've set up centers in other places,
Right.
costing out what different versions of it might cost, might require, investment it might require. And in between, we did a study on mortgage lending practices after the post housing crisis,
Right.
to see if loans were still being made in a predatory fashion, particularly to in minority communities and poor communities. And what we found out was something kind of interesting, that lenders were under so much pressure now to make only sound loans that they've gone overboard and are redlining poor neighborhoods, so that a person of color, in this case we were looking at Black and Latino, a Black and Latino owner with the same amount of money, same income, same money down, similar house, in say Hempstead Village, had a harder time getting a mortgage than somebody in a white community, a white person in a white community. Same. So and that was very useful. The government wasn't even, the banks weren't even aware of doing it. They didn't even fight with us on it. You know, they wanted to see the data. They wanted to fix it because, you know, in light of what I said earlier, they know who their customers are becoming. They're not just all white people. You know, and they don't want to be known as a bank that treats people of color badly, and they shouldn't want to be known that way. But now it's a matter of money. So and we did a lot of others. We've done a lot of others. We did a comparison, a quantitative and a qualitative comparison of Queens and Nassau County for a bank that's thinking of moving from Nassau into Queens. And in order to get a license or approval from the state to do that, they had to prove that the place they're moving to bore a resemblance. And we were a little skeptical when we went into it. We said, look, if we don't find it, you know, we're not going to just say it. And they said, no, it's all right, we need to know. And we were shocked at how similar Queens and Nassau are now.
Oh, wow. Good to know, because I didn't know about this thing.
We can even do research for your business.
There you go. So you basically, you know, you can kind of business plan writer. Business plan.
Well, yeah. We sometimes do that. The Regional Economic Development Council, the Long Island chapter, which was created by the governor, you have to put a report out every year. The region has to put it out. And since Stuart Binowitz is the co-chair of the Long Island Regional Economic, he asked if the center would play a major role. We do it pro bono. We don't get paid for this. This is part of my job at Hofstra. Of course, they don't let me get away with not having to do something else, but it's a great thing to do for the region, for the economy, and for the university, and I'm proud to do it. But we do what amounts to Long Island business plan. We put that out. You know, it's multidisciplinary. We work with professors, researchers, scientists in almost, you know, probably half the departments at Hofstra, and there are a lot of departments.
Oh, wow. Let me talk to you about discrimination.
Sure.
Like, obviously, you know, you've been dealing with all, you know, diversity and all that. What do you think of discrimination? Because I did ask other guests also here, including Dr. Butts.
Well, I don't know what he said, but I think it's still alive and well, unfortunately. I think that there are many more neighborhoods where a person of color can move without issue. But there are still so many where they would feel understandably uncomfortable. I also have a concern that of discrimination among the newcomers, where you know, groups moving into a neighborhood just repeat the same patterns. Like, you know, when some of the Jewish and Italian and Irish people are aging out and leaving the North Shore, they're being replaced by, you know, by East Asians, South Asians, and other new immigrants, and their communities still don't have, you know, any blacks and Latinos. Within the Herrick's district, I remember I did a magazine article, it wasn't an academic work, about the diversity. And within the Herrick School District, which is one of the only majority Asian school districts in any American suburb, the Korean parents have their own, you know, group. The Chinese parents have their own group. The Indian have their own groups. I think the Pakistani related. The Muslims have all their own groups. So within the newcomers, it's a problem. And what we're seeing in some of the poorer communities is black on brown discrimination between Latinos and African Americans.
Wow.
We're even seeing it. We're even seeing it in within the black community, with Caribbean Americans versus traditional African Americans versus Haitian Americans.
Wow.
You know, the pie starts getting sliced pretty thin, and it's a real problem. And it just seems to me such a brutal irony. There are some communities even where there are disputes going on between Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, and Reform Jews.
Wow.
Down in the Lawrence School District, for example, the district is run by Orthodox Jews. And I'm not passing a value judgment of who's right and who's wrong.
Right.
But there is a lot of dissension. Up in the Great Neck area, there was discrimination against the Persian Jews, the Iranian Jews who came in. And then the Iranian Jews started fighting among themselves.
Right. Wow.
There are at least seven different Iranian synagogues in like a 3 square mile area.
I know.
I mean, really?
Isn't that amazing?
Really? And I'm sure you could tell me stories in the Indian community that I don't know, between Sikhs and non-Sikhs, and it just gets crazy. And until we can get over this, we will never fully realize our potential.
How do you get over it?
I don't know. I think if the only answer I have is that people of good faith and well-meaning, armed with facts and figures, try to bring people together to try to make it clear how much is at stake. And again, it's not just their hearts and hearts and souls, squishy, warm things, but it's their pocketbook. It's their ability to sell their house, to run their business. That we just have to stop doing this. It's so counterproductive. And in the end, you know who gets hurt? It's children.
Yeah.
You know, when one of the numbers that has always struck me as just an abomination, and they change, so these may be old numbers. 20%, 80% of all the Black and Latino students on Long Island attend 20% of the schools, which means Blacks and Latinos, who are among some of the poorest students economically, are packed into the same school districts.
Right.
And these happen to be some of the fastest growing communities.
Right.
So what are we doing? We are educating more and more of our young students in the poorest and poorest performing schools. How does that help us? It certainly doesn't help them.
Right.
It certainly doesn't help their families and their community. But how does it help? How would it help you, for example,
Right.
when you need to go to market and hire people?
Right.
That all these folks are just not qualified because when maybe they could have been if attention was paid earlier on.
Right.
Now, I know it's very complicated. I know that some people feel, and I don't disagree, that you just can't throw money after each problem.
Right.
But you've got to do something different than we're doing. And the root of it all, the root is segregation. That we instead of having a county-wide school district or a town-wide school district, we might have 25 school districts in one town.
Right.
And while the federal government and the courts will not allow you to segregate within a district, like for example, my old school district, Dix Hills, used to have to redraw the lines because some schools were getting too heavily not away. You had to spread it around. You couldn't create pockets of race or poverty. But Wyandanch, which was an all-minority school, one of the poorest and poorest performing in Suffolk County, was right next to my school district, Dix Hills.
Yeah, I know, right, yeah.
We weren't all white. I said earlier, it was a mix, but still it was probably 75% white, and even a lot of the non-white people were fairly prosperous.
Right.
Why aren't they 2 school districts? Or why aren't the 8 school districts? So you dilute the impact of this poverty and expose the kids in the poorer performing schools to sharper, better prepared, peers.
Right.
But the chances of Long Island school districts merging with each other.
That is so.
They won't even merge, even when you have districts.
Even good school district also don't.
Well, that's right. Two white districts won't merge.
They don't.
Two middle class districts won't merge.
Exactly.
They just don't want to do it for all kinds of crazy reasons. And some that might make sense because they don't trust government. They don't trust their leaders, which is a whole other problem, which will get us into the presidential thing of the crazy phenomenon going on right now.
But see, India also, as you know, is a very diverse country. We got south, north, in east, west. We got lot of different communities. We have 21 official languages that we speak, and we got every region has a different thing, right? And everybody got united together for a single goal, independence, before independence, right? So what I'm thinking is that when all these problems and all these communities, because they're in their own igloo, they don't know, and they don't care about outside, they're just there. But if there is a common goal comes up, then probably they will unite and forget about for a little while at least.
I agree with you. Yeah. I just don't know what that common goal would be on Long Island.
That's the thing.
Some of our major institutions have found a way to become meritocracies. Look at the military, which was completely segregated in World War II, possibly even beyond that for a time. It was Truman who desegregated the military, I think in 1949. I may be off, but it was around that time. Now, my son was served for 4 years in the Army, and it was wide open. People may have hung out with people of their own color from time to time, but my son said there wasn't necessarily even that. That people would make fun of each other's ethnicity and race, but it was part of a unit. They were part of a team. They were just having fun with each other. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there are bases where, but by and large, Colin Powell becomes the highest ranking chief, a black man, and Barack Obama became the president. But I would say, in some ways, it'd be harder to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff than becoming a president of the United States. And here's what I mean. People will be watching this thinking he's out of his mind. But here's what I mean. All Barack Obama had to do was get elected. If he could make the case, if he could go over the heads of the bigots, if he could go around the elder statesmen in the party who originally rigged it for a different candidate, and get elected, then he's the president. Colin Powell has to be picked by that establishment. He can't run for that position. Yeah, and in some ways, I think he had a harder row to hoe. And if people still want to think I'm nuts, I understand that. But I think that in a certain way, it's true.
So is this true? When you mentioned earlier that when you were in the school or your kids were in the school, that two different African Americans were friends and they were playing around they didn't know even what is. So is it true when you are in the college or school, you have principals and you're you don't worry about this race and ethnicity, anything. But when you go into the real world,
yes, it's different.
That's when thing changes. Because of economic reason, because of family, because of all the pressure, this and that. Right?
Well, again, I think my kids, certainly my younger son, Sam, if I can brag for a second, he just got great marks on his MCATs, and his next step is hopefully get into a medical school. But Sam's been very lucky. Sam, some of the colleges that he went to just happened to be very diverse places. His undergraduate degree, he had his associate's degree from Farmingdale, which is an extremely diverse place. He got his bachelor's degree from Stony Brook. Then he got a post-baccalaureate in health sciences from Farmingdale, which was even more diverse when he went back. And when you go into the medical world, the medical world is filled with people of all races now. It's completely different. It's pretty close to a meritocracy. I have a cousin who's the dean of the Harvard Medical School, and he says they wall off even the deans and the top administrators from the selection process, so nobody can exercise any influence, that they try to do it. I mean, they have different categories. That maybe they have certain standards. They're looking for people from different backgrounds, which I think I happen to personally think is a great thing, because you want a balanced class. You don't want kids going with just people like them. A lot of academic and technical studies have shown that adding any kind of diversity to any team changes it in a positive way.
Okay.
And but my kids were lucky. They lucked out. My son went from high school into college for a few years at Nassau, which is a very diverse place, and then he went into the Army, which is a very diverse place, and now he lives overseas, which is a very diverse place. So I envy them. I really envy them.
Let me ask you this now. Like, for example, many people feel, let's say, in terms of college admission, I'm talking about now college admission, right? That when you mentioned that you have to mix up everything, like all the so when you are a person who is in Nevada, who has a medium grade, they are still able to get to a better college because like they look at the regional,
I know,
at the ethnicity.
Yeah. I don't know what Hofstra's policies are. I don't know how, but I just want to make sure everyone knows. I'm absolutely not speaking for Hofstra, and that it's not my area of expertise, and I would only be conjecturing. If I were putting together a class, and I had a chance to get a kid from Nevada in. As long as he were qualified, as long as he had or she had what it takes in terms of the academic and other background to thrive at my university, this mythical university, I think I would do everything I could to get that kid from Nevada, more so than I might do to get a kid who we have plenty of. Now, this may seem unfair to some people, but I think that in the long run, it's in the best interests of the students who are there. Not just the kid from Nevada, but the kid from Long Island. That's my bias. I'm a big believer in affirmative action if it's done intelligently. Even if maybe it'll cost my kid. Who knows? When my kid applies to medical school, maybe somebody's version of affirmative action will force him to have to go someplace else. Well, that's fine. There's a bigger game at play here than individual families and people, and I'm willing to accept that for what at least I consider in my own wisdom, in my humble opinion, to be for the greater good.
Now we're going to turn into your other hat, which is a political commentator. You're a political commentator for News 12 and many other major news papers, and including Newsday and all that. So this year is interesting year. Okay, so in my mind,
that's one word for it.
Exactly. So I'm talking about the congressional seat that's vacant. That is being vacant or will be vacant by Congressman Steve Israel, who is not running again, and there is a lot of people who are kind of going for that.
I think there's 4 or 5 now. A couple have dropped out. Todd Richmond dropped out. I think that what we still have left as of this taping is Tom Swazi, the former Nassau County executive, John Kamen, former North Hempstead supervisor, Anna Kaplan, a North Hempstead town councilwoman, Brad Gerstmann, I think still has his hat in the ring, and I know we're probably leaving. Steve Stern out in Suffolk, a Suffolk County legislator who's been term limited and is obviously looking for something else to do. Yeah.
So at least 5, maybe.
It's a big field. I think the primary comes up in June.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And on the Republican side, there are a couple of them still.
Yes.
Jack
Martins would be the odds-on favorite. It's not my opinion. It's what the political class is saying. And this will be decided long after the presidential race is decided.
Right. So it will be interesting, like who takes the district, because district is really kind of divided.
Yeah, it's got part of it's about 30% or so is in Suffolk.
Right.
I think 50 or more percent is in Nassau, and a little bit's in Queens.
Right.
And it is a much more heavily Democratic district than Republican, which is why, or certainly one of the reasons why you have so many Democrats going after it.
Right.
It's very rare that a congressional seat comes open, and it's rare, that it is as Democratic as it is. So that's one of the reasons why you see more Democrats going after it than Republicans.
So what happens to Jack Martin's, obviously,
Well, Jack Martin's is a state senator.
State senator.
So he's well known within a portion of the district. He's also the mayor of Mineola.
Right.
He did very well in the Senate district, within one of the Senate districts within the congressional district. A Democratic Senate district by enrollment.
Right.
And so the thinking on the Republican side, and I'm sure on Jack Martin's side, is that if I did well with Democrats in an even year election running for the state Senate, why shouldn't I not do well? Why should I not do well running for Congress?
Right.
And the only kind of Republican who would have a good chance to win this district in November would be a Jack Martin's. Somebody who has a positive reputation with voters, who has drawn crossover votes from Democrats and as well as from independents, who's not seen as an extremist. In his case of his party, that would be a conservative extremist. But it's still going to be a difficult task for a Republican to win. One of the reasons is that since this is a Democratic state, people vote in greater numbers in presidential election years.
Right.
And this race will be in a presidential election year.
Right.
So there are likely to be far more Democrats out than normal. If he had run 2 years earlier, in a gubernatorial election year, for instance, or 2 years later, arguably he would have a better shot if he remained popular as a senator and had a strong organization and of course could raise the money. So this is a tough road for him, as it is for a lot of Republicans in what we call swing suburban districts. These are places where that actually decide presidential elections. The last 6 presidential elections, at least, suburban voters in a handful of swing states, or 2 hands full of swing states, have essentially decided who controls the White House and Congress. I mean, think about it. If you and I said, all right, let's figure out how the cities are going to vote in November. Well, we know they're going to vote Democratic, and we probably could come up with a number that wouldn't be that far off. Let's say 58%. And we said, okay, now let's go to rural red America, Wyoming, Alabama, wherever that is. Well, okay, the Republicans are going to win that, and we'll come up with a number for that too. The place where you can't necessarily come up with a number with any great certainty is those places in the middle, literally and figuratively. They're more moderate. They are between city and country. And they are the suburbs. Wasn't always the case. I don't know when you came to Long Island, but when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s and even 70s, this was a heavily Republican territory. It was a reliably Republican territory. In fact, Suffolk County gave Ronald Reagan his largest plurality of a major county in America. And nowadays, Suffolk County is controlled by a Democratic county executive and a very Democratic legislature. So, the world turns, and if not for the perception that the Democratic county executive 8 or so years ago was not paying enough attention to the job, campaigning for a higher office, and if not for the unpopularity of Barack Obama after a year in office, Nassau County would still be controlled by Democrats. And there's something called demographic which you could also call democratic destiny in political science circles. The suburbs are still changing. We spent a lot of time talking about that.
Right.
Well, right now, minority and immigrant voters are voting Democratic.
Right.
African Americans in the largest numbers, Latinos in nearly as great a numbers, and surprising to some, Asians are in that area, 60-70%
Right.
in the last elections.
Right.
If you came from another planet and you looked at the social and other characteristics of some of the new immigrant groups, and then you compared them to at least what's on paper
Right.
as the tenets of the Republican Party, Indian, Asian, when I say Asian, I mean Chinese,
Right.
Korean, seem perfectly suited to being Main Street Republicans.
Right.
But the Republican Party nationally, I'm not talking about locally necessarily,
Right.
but nationally has so turned off immigrant groups who understand that, you say you're only coming for so-and-so,
Right.
but, one day they come for me. And unless the Republican Party can change that, they will be eventually a minority party because of the demographic trends, demographic destiny. And Long Island's heading that way, and a lot of the suburbs in these important, swing places are heading that way.
I think, Republican Party is kind of changing their...
Well, Long Island Republicans have been pretty smart, and sometimes, and I say this with a smile because I know a lot of them, but in some very ruthless ways. I remember back in the 70s and 80s,
Right.
and even the early 90s,
Right.
the Republican Party was pretty raw in running ads and in sending messages that whoever was running, on the Democratic line would turn Nassau into the 6th borough or perpetuate the Queensification. Now, they weren't talking about apartment buildings.
Right.
I mean, they may have said that it was about, but it was really about those
Right.
people.
Right.
Well, the Republican Party, also at the same time, even preaching austerity and these other anti-urban messages, were smart enough to know that if they got beat 10-1 and 20-1 in certain communities, that could be a problem, especially in an unexpectedly close election.
Right.
So the Nassau County Republicans provided a higher level of discretionary social service funding to various groups per capita higher than New York City. So they knew.
Yeah.
They made sure that
Right.
that the ministers who had the black churches had the youth programs, and they did it. Made sure that there was a stop sign.
Right.
And maybe the black community would say, well, we don't get the same level of service, but they were getting services.
Right.
Now it's to the point where the Republican Party realizes that this message just doesn't play anymore. That it's wrong.
Right.
That it will cost them.
Right.
They lost a seat that everyone expected they would hold until the legislator retired. John Ciotti, who I felt was a very competent legislator.
Right.
He was elected when his district was still majority white. It began shifting. This was the Elmont area.
Right.
He was running against an ambitious and talented young man, Carrier Solage.
Yes.
And the campaign of John Ciotti made a mistake.
Right.
One of the campaign workers put out some blatantly racist stuff, and Carrier and the Democratic Party were quick enough to capitalize on it.
Right.
It somehow energized a community that did not vote proportionally to their numbers,
Right.
and diluted their own clout, but came out, and John lost his job. John Ciotti lost his job.
Right.
Now he's got a better job at the medical center, but he lost the job that he loved, and he was good at it.
Wow.
And they know they can't do that, and the party rarely does it.
Right.
And even when you might think they do it, you're not always right.
Right.
You know,
Right.
as I'm sometimes told that I'm not always right.
let's talk about the presidential election, right?
Wow.
On the Democratic side, obviously,
Wow.
you know, we got two people.
Wow.
You know.
Well, as we're taping this, we are about to go into Super Tuesday. So people should know that where we're coming from.
Right.
And right now, Donald Trump has won 3 of the first 4 contests, all in quirky states that, for one reason or another, don't really resemble America.
Right.
But no presidential candidate has ever gone on to win without taking at least one of them, probably 2.
Right.
Certainly one of the first 2, and then at least one of the others.
Right.
Donald Trump has won 3 of those 4,
Right.
and he's been winning them by ever bigger margins in places where he wasn't expected to be as strong.
Right.
So right now he is a phenomenon. Bernie Sanders had seemed as if he were from the other side, the same kind of phenomenon,
Right.
but he got beat in Nevada,
Right.
and it just seemed to take a lot of air out of his balloon. Doesn't mean it won't get reinflated, but I'm just talking where we are now, so
Right,
people understand what we're where we're coming from. Super Tuesday is coming up,
Right.
and when people hear us, they will probably have experienced what happened.
Right, they would have.
And essentially, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, one the so-called revolutionary, and the other who was being revolted against,
Right.
could, by the end of March 1st,
Right.
basically put this thing away for both parties.
Right.
If either of them wins 10 states of the 13 in play, roughly 30, I think it's a little different on each party.
Right.
American Samoa's in there somewhere, and I know that's not a state. But if they win overwhelming enough, it's really all over but the shouting.
Right.
It really is.
Right.
And then you will have an unexpected pairing of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump.
Right.
And what will happen, nobody knows. I mean, conventional wisdom, with which I am captive of from 40 years of writing and observing politics, does not prepare you to effectively analyze what's going on. And I freely admit, I missed the Barack Obama phenomenon. I remember that I was actually writing a book, which a publisher was going to put out, which was the case for John McCain and the case for Hillary.
Right.
And I was asked to write the case for Hillary.
Okay.
It was like a 50,000 word editorial on why she should be president.
Right.
But to do it with facts and figures and experience like that. And I remember when Obama first started showing some steam in mid 2007.
Right.
And the publisher comes to me, the agent actually came to me and said the publisher is concerned about Barack Obama. And I said, flavor of the month. Flavor of the month. Because they didn't want to commit to a book pairing of the case for McCain and the case for Clinton.
Right.
If suddenly there was, one of them wasn't going to be the candidate.
Right.
So I said, infamously said, flavor of the month. And I didn't see it because he did it in a way that had never been done before.
Right.
And he did it in a way where Kansas counted. The Democratic Kansas primary or caucus counted.
Right.
And nobody campaigned, nobody cared. It didn't matter. But he did it and began amassing delegates. And before you knew it, Clinton went on that rush through the big states and still didn't have enough to catch him.
Wow.
So I preface what I'm going to say by saying that I didn't see this coming, just like a lot of pundits have to say. But at this point, I think that Trump's biggest challenge, if he is the nominee, is the same challenge generically that Hillary Clinton has, which is the same challenge that any presidential candidate has once they turn from the primary, where they're appealing relatively to the extremist elements of their party, and then have to go to the general. And that is the suburban swing voters in whatever are seen to be the 8 or 10 swing states. And in the past, they've been Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida. In the past, it's been St. Louis, which hasn't been a swing state. Now it's more Virginia, even North Carolina, depending upon how the dynamics shape up. Definitely Nevada, Colorado, possibly New Mexico, Again, depending who else is on the ticket,
Right.
A state like Iowa could be a swing state,
Iowa, right.
but in any of those states that have significant suburbs, it's the suburban and urban areas that will determine the election. Even in a place like Iowa, West Des Moines, Iowa is a big suburb,
Right.
and it went very big for Marco Rubio
Right. Yeah.
because it tends to be, even among Republicans,
Right.
more moderate than the rural places,
Right. Right.
and where the Republican base really is.
Right.
So Trump will have problems appealing to moderate suburbanites who are not quite as obsessive about immigration issues, are not quite as scared about terrorism.
Right.
Although San Bernardino may have changed that, we have to see. Who are more tolerant than he sometimes seems to be. Hillary Clinton has a curious issue. Now, the Clintons, Bill Clinton, was the first Democrat to make the suburbs safe for the Democratic Party. The suburbs grew up Republican, starting post-World War, and he's the first Democrat to really do well in the suburbs. I'm not counting JFK, who did well in some Catholic suburbs, but that was a kind of an asterisk.
Right.
And so what is her, and Hillary Clinton is seen as a moderate,
Right.
but the strategy that she had to employ, or has had to employ, is to basically wrap herself around Barack Obama.
Right.
And in
She's doing
suburban
now.
communities,
Right.
Barack Obama isn't all that popular.
Right.
He did not carry Long Island 4 years ago,
Right.
when he won in the rest of the country
Right.
fairly handily.
Right.
And the numbers have only grown worse since then. So, so will Hillary Clinton, if it turns out to be the nominee, have to pay a price among swing suburban voters for her close allegiance and promotion of Barack Obama? Can Trump appeal to the softer side of suburbanites, sort of change his
Message. Yeah. he was
his
doing
message?
I'm
It's
sure.
not, it's not even the message so much as the tone. Suburbanites recoil. Now, before I finish that sentence, there are plenty of very conservative and very liberal people in suburbia.
Right.
There are plenty of intolerant people on both sides.
Right.
But there is a preponderance, a bigger share of moderates, and for all kinds of reasons which we don't have time to talk about.
Right.
It's not only the message that they recoil from, but it's the tone. They don't like extremists of any stripe, left or right.
Right.
And people who are bombastic, boisterous, and nasty just don't do well,
Right.
by and large. People who have crude, simplistic messages, or people who are seen as pandering or talking down to them, are just not going to do well. And both those candidates have trust issues and tone issues.
Right.
And it's going to be really interesting to see which one is able to reboot.
Right.
Where I'm in a tech firm here, so reboot. Which one will reboot and be able to appeal to the middle at the same time that they hold their bases?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, their bases anyway.
Right. I mean, Hillary Clinton can't all of a sudden start disparaging Barack Obama and expect to hold the base of black voters. That's not going to happen.
It's not gonna happen.
So it's a intricately choreographed political ballet.
I heard that I know why people like Trump is because, he has his own money, he doesn't take money from anybody.
Right.
Number two is that he's got so much experience of managing large, thing, and he knows how to hire the right people.
Right.
And therefore, he's better qualified to be a president because president doesn't
Right.
do.
Well, that's what some people think, and that's, those are traits that he's never going to steal anything because he's rich,
Right.
as if rich people never steal.
No.
I mean, really? And they say about Hillary, she's got experience and she's served in the White House.
Right.
But if you don't like that White House,
Right.
and you don't like the president she's served with as
Right.
First Lady and Secretary of State, then that argument's not going to wash. So I think that it's not so much the fact that he's a wealthy guy and that he has business experience that is driving
Right.
his support right now. It is an anger that we're also seeing on the Democratic side in the Sanders phenomenon, where people are fed up with the way things are. They're fed up with what they consider the establishment, and in the case of the two candidates, they're very different establishments.
Right.
They don't care, no matter what arguments you make about the realism of the various proposals, deporting 13 million people, or health care for all, in 3 days, or whatever. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but it doesn't. They don't want to hear it. They don't care.
Yeah.
They want somebody different.
Right. That's what.
They want somebody different.
Exactly.
And that's what's driving it. But again, Sanders has won one contest in a very quirky state.
Yeah.
Clinton's won 2 in quirky states.
Right.
We don't know, what's going to happen in South Carolina for the Democrats. We don't know what's going to happen on Super Tuesday. The race is still relatively wide open.
Right.
It's full of surprises, and I suspect that it will, last word, continue to surprise.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it. Really, lot to learn. Yeah.
I learned from you too.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, you can email me at rajmitv@gmail.com. That's again rajmitv@gmail.com. You can watch our prior shows on YouTube at youtube.com/Infosys International. That's again youtube.com/Infosys International. Until next time, have a great week.